Manitoba, scene of the last great concentration of steam power to be found in Canada. This prairie province, situated approximately at the geographical centre of continental Canada, has many lines radiating from its capital city of Winnipeg. The first 20 or so views of Canadian National were shot at St. James Tower, Winnipeg. With the helpful cooperation of towerman Jim McLaughlin, we were able to anticipate the various trains and pick our camera locations with care. St. James Tower was located at mileage 4.8 on Canadian National's Gladstone subdivision, which is now known as the Rivers subdivision. At this point, the CN main line is intersected or joined by three other lines: the Canadian Pacific's La Riviere subdivision, the CN's Oak Point subdivision, and the Midland Railroad of Manitoba. Our opening scene shows engine 5619, a K3G class, built by Montreal Locomotive in 1911, the Grand Trunk Pacific. This westbound train is number 17 to Verdun, a distance of 219 miles. Next up is 6073, flying green flags on first number 3, the Continental. This section running as far as Saskatoon only. The car, second from the tail end, is the division superintendent's business car. Coupled to it is a van, which will be used by the spare train crew returning the next day on an extra freight. The 6073 was the first U1F class to be retired, although not the first to be scrapped. .3224 is a Class S1A engine, 282 Mikado type, and our first coal burner of the day. Coal-burning engines were not too prevalent at this time, as most of the power had been converted to oil. The CN owned more 282-type locomotives than any other road in Canada, a grand total of 476 engines. We now see engine 5558, K3A class 462 Pacific type, built by the Grand Trunk in 1910, and still going strong 48 years later. While primarily a passenger locomotive, she does a good job on short freight trains. She was a coal burner to the end, which came in April 1960. The 6050 is seen heading into Winnipeg with a drag freight from Dauphin. The U1E class engines were a good-looking locomotive, particularly when they sported their original Vanderbilt tenders, which were replaced on many of them with the rectangular tenders when converted to oil in the 1950s. Two of this class were chosen for Royal Train Service, the 6047 in 1939 and the 6057 in 1951. Another coal burner, 3211, a 282 type, was built in 1916 by Canadian Locomotive and was formerly Canadian Government Railways number 2811. This engine was scrapped at Transcona in April 1960. The S1A class could be seen from the prairies to the east coast in freight service. This is one of the husky-looking S2C class locomotives, number 3587. This is one of the few classes of Canadian National steam power built with the square-topped bell-pair firebox. This type of firebox found favor on two major American railroads, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Great Northern. Due to its design, this firebox is heavier than the more standard, rounded radial stayed type. The advantage of the design is greater heating surface and steam space. These engines were designed specifically for the western region. This is train number 63, heading for Flin Flon, with the 6052 on the point. This train operated on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday over 8 subdivisions, a distance of 575 miles. The consist included coaches, a sleeper, and a buffet lounge to Flin Flon, plus a through sleeper connecting at the Paw with train number 123 for Churchill on Hudson's Bay. Seen on a river's drag, the 3544 is one of the group of S2A class engines that lost their original rectangular tenders for the round Vanderbilt tender in 1931. These engines were built by Montreal Locomotive Works in 1923, and 3544 was scrapped in September 1961. Here we see 6050 once again. She is westbound, heading back to Dauphin. These engines, when first built in 1930, were fitted with Alesco feed water heaters and feed pumps. Later these were removed, and they were equipped with the LESCO exhaust steam injectors on the left side, just below the firebox, as can be seen in this sequence. The removal of the feed water heater gave the engine a cleaner appearance on the front end. We do not know the reason for the conversion to the exhaust steam injector. Possibly the feed water bundle plugged with scale in the hard water areas of Saskatchewan. Looks like the head end brakeman is reading the morning paper, or perhaps his time card. This is train number 12 from Saskatoon. The 6075 was one of the bullet-nosed engines built in 1944 for passenger service on the eastern region. When transferred to the western region in the late 1950s, most of them had the conical nose removed. We see here the only 280 consolidation type engine I was able to record at this time. This is 2174, which was formerly Canadian Northern 2174. She was built by Canadian Locomotive Company in 1913 and scrapped at Transcona, May 1961. She was converted to oil in her later years. The 5152 is seen heading for Dauphin on a drag freight. She is fitted with the old-style wooden pilot with the horizontal-style crossbars. These engines could be seen from coast to coast in passenger and freight service. They were some of the first new engines acquired by the CNR. Another of the ex-bullet-nosed U1Fs, 6066, is seen returning from Dauphin. Two of the reasons for the nose removal were, after conversion to oil, too high a temperature developed in the front end, causing burning, and convenience for front-end inspection by the Boilermakers. The gentleman in the red shirt taking a photo of 5152 is Bob Clark, CN Winnipeg train dispatcher, now retired. This is Transcona, just east of Winnipeg, and 5152 is heading train number 215, the Reddit mixed train, which ran on Wednesdays and Fridays. Number 17 to Verdun, headed by 10-wheeler 1535, X number 1328. Note the modern-style diesel-type numbers on the cab. Running light to Brandon, we see 1444, X-Grand Trunk Pacific 621. There were rumors about this engine being preserved, but unfortunately this did not materialize, and she was scrapped at Transcona in September 1961. Once again, 5152 puts in an appearance, this time on an eastbound drag from Rivers. Rivers, Manitoba, a division point, was named after Sir Charles Rivers Wilson, one-time chairman of the Grand Trunk Railway. The 5152 was built by Montreal Locomotive in July 1920. On an extra east from Dauphin, we see U1A 6010, one of the original group of mountain-type 482s built in 1923. When first built, this engine was assigned to the Atlantic region. In later years, the front cab windows of these engines were enlarged and mounted at an angle into the outer corners of the cab. The 1535 passes our lens once again on number 17, which ran on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The 1535 was a coal burner and was built by Montreal Locomotive in 1910, the old Canadian Northern. Number 12 from Saskatoon is headed by 6043. This engine is noted as the last steam engine to see regular service on the Canadian National. On April the 25th, 1960, she pulled train number 76 into Winnipeg from the PAW, ending the steam era. Engine 4096, X3804, is seen 5 miles west of Pacific Junction. This engine, one of 6, was designed for hard water districts and were originally assigned to the Touchwood subdivision, Melville to Waters, Saskatchewan. The design featured an external dry pipe along the top of the boiler, instead of the conventional steam dome. The steam was forced through slotted baffles before entering the dry pipe, thus eliminating much of the water and impurities, responsible for priming and water carryover into the cylinders. The 3561 is seen on a westbound Exeter Rivers over the Hart subdivision. This location is Pacific Junction, where the Hart and Gladstone subdivisions divided. Pacific Junction was a train order office, but has long since disappeared. The Hart subdivision is abandoned, and the Gladstone, seen in the foreground, has been retained as the main line to both Rivers and Dauphin, and is now the Rivers subdivision. The 3561 was the last of the 3500s to be scrapped. Another view at Pacific Junction. This time we have T1C class 4039, a 210-2 type. This class was among the first engines ordered by the Canadian National after its formation in late 1918. The 4039 was built by the Montreal Locomotive Works in October 1920. The engine is still a coal burner. These engines were built as hand bombers, but in 1922 duplex stokers were being applied to some of the class. Here's the grand old 6000 about to enter the roundhouse at Dauphin. This first U1A class 482 mountain type is the prototype of the CNR's famous dual-service locomotives, which with refinements developed through the years culminated in the popular bullet-nosed U1F 6060 series of 1944. It also fostered the development of the 484 Northern type, of which the CNR owned more than any other railroad. The 6000 emerged from the works of the Canadian Locomotive Company at Kingston, Ontario, on May 31, 1923, the first of 16 similar engines, classed at that time as the largest passenger engine in Canada. The 6000s were exhibited at Montreal and Toronto before entering service. Originally, 6 were assigned to the Montreal-Toronto passenger trains, although they didn't run through at that time. The remaining 10 were assigned to the Atlantic region. When first built, the 6000s had their Alesco feedwater heaters mounted on the pilot platform. Later, they were raised and mounted ahead of the stack, which became standard practice. Strangely, 6000 and sister 6001 were both scrapped together in April 1962. The following 4 sequences show 4329, the T4B class 210-2 type, running from Dauphin to Kamsack, Saskatchewan on an extra freight, July 1, 1958. The sequences were taken east and west of Asheville, west of Gilbert Plains, and west of Grandview. In company with Lawrence Stuckey, noted Western Canadian Railroad historian and one-time CPR engineer, we chased 4329 with my 1954 Ford along the paralleling Manitoba Route No. 5 for 18 miles. The T4B class had the highest boiler pressure of any 210-2 types on the CNR. They were pressed to 275 pounds per square inch. 11 T4A and B engines were renumbered in the early 1959. 4329 became the 4729. At one time, around 1956, 4329 was assigned to Jasper, Alberta. As far as I know, the only 4300 series engine that didn't have an Alesco feedwater heater was engine 4301, which had a bald-looking front end. The last sequence, showing 4329 crossing a bridge over the Valley River, was shot from a farmer's chicken run. We were surrounded with cackling leghorns, protesting the invasion of their privacy. The 4329 ended her days in the Transcona scrap line, March 1959. Engine 5088 is seen on the Reddit mixed train at Dugald. This was the scene of an horrendous head-on collision September 1, 1947, right in front of the station. Extra passenger 6001 slammed head-on into train number 4, hauled by 6046. 31 people were killed, including the crew of 6001, and 85 injured. We now direct our focus toward Canada's premier transcontinental road, the Canadian Pacific, which was responsible for opening up the West. Some of the first CPR track was constructed in the Winnipeg area, as early as 1875, under government supervision. The following 2 scenes are taken at Carberry, 29 miles east of Brandon on the main line. This scene of 2700 arriving at Carberry shows 3 operations that were everyday events in the days of steam. You will see the operator hooping up orders, the engine taking on water, and the engineer oiling around with his long-spouted oil can. This was probably the longest sequence I ever shot with my Kodak K100 camera. According to official records, 2700, the first of the G4 class, was built in October 1919. However, a builder's plate from her in my collection shows the builder's date as July 1919, which would be simultaneous with the emergence from Ingest shops of the prototype G3, number 2300. The G3 and G4 class were identical, except for a slight difference in cylinder dimensions and 70-inch drivers on the 2700 as against 75-inch drivers on the 2300. The CPR tested the two types over many divisions, and the results indicated the G3 class would be the CPR standard heavy Pacific type. 172 G3s were built, with only 18 G4s being completed. When first built, the 2700 was a coal burner, and it was assigned to Fort William, Ontario. It was the only large Passenger engine to be graced with the assigned engineer's name on the cab sides, William Blennerhassett. He was a senior engineer with service dating from 1881, when he entered service with the CPR at Winnipeg as an engine wiper, advancing to a fireman and moving to Fort William in 1883. Later, becoming an engineer, he retired in 1927. The 2700 at one time saw service on the transcontinental passenger trains, the Imperial Limited, the Trans-Canada Limited, and the Dominion. In later years, she was reduced to freight service and ended up in the Winnipeg Freight Pool, with about a year of service left in 1958. Carberry was a day-night train order office at mileage 105.8 west of Winnipeg. A short distance east of the station is a crossing at grade with the CPR's mainline Carberry subdivision and the CNR's Carberry subdivision branch line to Neepawa. The signals governing the diamond can be seen as 2700 moves out of the scene. It looks like the crew are discussing the presence of one of those goofy rail photographers. After 2700's departure, P1N Mikado 5234 pulled in for a water stop. We see 5234 as she is about to leave eastbound for Winnipeg, putting on a display of black smoke, as she's a stoker-fired coal burner. It looks like the right cylinder piston packing is leaking steam, as well as a slight leak at the cylinder cocks. The P1N class have an interesting history, as they're all rebuilds from the N2 class 280 consolidations. A total of 65 5200s were built. This particular engine, 5234, has a history beginning in 1910, when Class N3A number 1870, the 280 type, was built by Montreal Locomotive Works. This engine was renumbered to 3870 in 1912 and was rebuilt July 1924 with new cylinders and valve gear, and was reclassified N2A number 3670. Rebuilt again in June 1948, she emerged from the Weston shops at Winnipeg as a 282 type number 5234. After a short working life of 10 years, she was scrapped at Weston, August 1961. The P1N was another very versatile engine, seeing service across Canada in both freight and passenger service. They were used in passenger service on the famous Kettle Valley line in southern British Columbia, until replaced by the diesels. Here we have train number 107, operating from Brandon to Estevan, Saskatchewan, distance of 165 miles on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It departed Brandon at 1450, arriving at Estevan 2202. The 2548 was built by the CPR in 1908 and rebuilt in 1926. She was scrapped in 1958. The 1273 is seen entering the east end of Brandon Yards on mixed train number 556 from Minnedosa, a distance of 50 miles. Most of the run over the Rapid City subdivision, joining the main line at Chater, 5 miles east of Brandon. This train ran on Wednesday and Saturday. Brandon is the first divisional point west of Winnipeg on the main line. Note the old wooden combine and baggage car on the tail end, typical of the type of equipment used on branch line passenger service. As number 556 arrives in the yard, you can see the cabooses of 2 westbound freights waiting to leave for Broadview, Saskatchewan. Once again, we see 1273 heading east over the main line towards the junction at Chater, where it will run over the Rapid City and Varco subdivisions to McGregor, a total distance of 79 miles. The train is number 528, which will turn at McGregor and return to Brandon as number 527. These trains operating on Thursday only at that time. D10 number 1007 is seen westbound over the Carberry subdivision main line, heading home to Brandon on mixed train number 558, which is returning from Lenore, a distance of 57 miles, operating on Monday and Thursdays. The 1007 is seen again on train number 558 north of Chater on the Rapid City subdivision. It is being paced on a service road by a Manitoba hydro repair truck. As can be seen, the engine is equipped with an auxiliary tender for extra water. The 1007 was built in 1912 by Montreal Locomotive Works. Our friend 1273 is seen again near Moore Park on mixed number 528. The 1273, which is of the G5D class, was built by Canadian Locomotive Company in 1948, and the entire class of 30 engines were assigned to the western lines. They were built as coal burners and remained as such to the end. Heavy action out of Minnedosa on June 26, 1958. Minnedosa was a busy spot, being a terminal with 3 assist assignments, which in steam days utilized 280s and 210Os in pusher service. On this particular day, I'd hoped to shoot 5781, a 210O type, on assist. Unfortunately for me, the powers that be decided to use their shiny new diesels. The 8811 and 8807 are seen assisting 2376 at G3F on the heavy grade southbound to Amir, a distance of 3.2 miles. The 2376 is an oil burner and appears to be working with a light throttle, hence the clear stack. I guess the boys on 2376 decided to see how good the diesels were at pulling. You will note near the tail end 2 very early piggyback cars, rebuilt from standard flat cars. These cars appear to have full-width apron plates across the ends of the car, which is rather unusual, as present-day cars have the narrow-type plate located at alternate corners. The van is the old faithful wooden type, which will be replaced in about 5 years' time by the modernized yellow mechanical jobs. The wide-open prairie shows up the profile of G3F 2377 west of Kemnay, heading for Broadview, Saskatchewan, the next divisional point west of Brandon. These engines were built with medium-sized 8-wheel tenders originally. Later, some were replaced with the larger 12-wheel variety when converted to oil burners. You will note the flat car with the tank of a wrecked tank car. This is probably heading to the tank car repair facility at Moose Jaw. Another G3 is seen wheeling west of Kemnay, 2362 of the G3E class, built in 1938. The oak red cab door is a badge of some Western Lines engines. This little ostentation, along with graphited gray front ends, is applied to many Western locomotives. 2 of this class were involved in a bad head-on collision in 1941, the result of misreading an engine number. I understand this resulted in the designing of the front number boxes from wedge shape to the larger face flat style. Here comes Royal Hudson 2863 on number 44, the overnight passenger train from Moose Jaw to Winnipeg. This shot was taken from an embankment located 2 miles west of Douglas. It was part of an approach for an overpass over the CPR main line by the old Grand Trunk Pacific for a projected line into Brandon, but it was never built. From our vantage point, you can see for miles over the flat prairies, and as it was early in the morning, the howl of coyotes could be heard in the distance. As can be seen, engine 2352 is streaked with lime deposits due to the hard water found in many areas of the West. This is a Saskatchewan district engine assigned to the Regina Division and seems to have strayed from her home ground. The 2352 is the second engine of the modernized G3 class, built in 1938. This engine is a familiar sight every summer to steam fans and tourists out of North Vancouver. 2860 is seen here in regular service, assigned at this time to trains 43 and 44. The 2860, 2864 H1E class were built in 1940 for the Vancouver Revelstoke service on the Dominion. We now return to St. James Tower for CPR action crossing the CNR Diamond. This is 1274 on train 103, 105 to Napinka and Loughton, running Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This shot was taken for a change of pace from the west side, showing the engine in shadow, which was just as well, as the smoke is blowing heavily to the east. An eastbound freight from Lyleton is seen approaching St. James from the south, with G5D 1291 on the point. These particular engines were equipped with the Alesco coil-type feed-water heater mounted in front of the stack. This type of heater was also applied to the T1C Selkirks and the P2K 5400 Mikados, all Western Lines power. The coil-type heater was never used on the Eastern Lines. Once again, 1274 polishes the rails at St. James. This engine was assigned to this run for approximately a year, and had a well-maintained appearance. The run from Winnipeg to Lyleton was 240 miles. We receive a friendly greeting from the fireman, who is getting used to seeing us. We see P1N 5244 heading timecard freight number 83 to Rosenfeld, a distance of 56 miles. This train operated on Wednesdays only. The engine was built March 1949 and saw some service on the Northern Alberta Railways at one time. She was scrapped at Weston Shops February 1964. Another day, and we see 1274 in action again on a regular assignment to Lyleton. St. James Tower is no longer standing today. The junction has been long under CTC operation. The abandoned tower stood for some time, being used as a lunchroom by the section gangs. This is Royal Hudson 2863 near Woodman Tower, once again on train number 44. The stainless steel boiler jacket is reported to be the one which was originally applied to the Royal Engine 2850 in 1939. When Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip visited Canada in October 1951, 2863 was assigned to their train for the British Columbia portion of their tour. I understand engine crews did not like the stainless steel jacket on account of the brilliant reflections from the sun. The 3101 is leaving Austin on train number 58, which later became number 44. The K1As 3100, 3101 were the largest 484 types in Canada. Actually, the boiler was the same as applied to the original 5900 Selkirk types. Unfortunately, these locomotives didn't quite live up to expectations, and no more were built. The 3101 is veritably leaving Austin in a cloud of steam. The 3602, an oil burner 280 N2 class, is doing duty on the nearby gravel pit spurs at Moose Nose, Springfield, and Provincial Gravel. She is equipped with an extra water tender, enabling her to spend more hours at work and not have to run for water. And so we come to the end of our sojourn in Manitoba, during the second last good year of steam operation. We returned in 1959, the last golden summer of steam across the prairies. Early 1960 saw the final curtain lower on steam forever.